Glenn Greenwald and Shep Smith of Fox News are going to discuss ISIS in Iraq and the Iraq War, and they get into a pretty interesting back and forth about the word terrorism. Let's listen.
You were on Bill Maher over the weekend, and we were talking about this ISIS group with others who are with them, obviously, and running to create a caliphate across the north of Iraq and Syria. And you said something to the effect of, who's worse, really, them or, in essence, the Americans who invaded or would invade? You equated our forces to terrorists.
Yeah, that's not actually what happened. I mean, the point that I was making is that there's this phrase, terrorism, that actually has very little definition. It doesn't mean really much of anything. It's a fear-mongering word that the government invokes every time it wants to justify its policy, from torturing people to putting people in Guantanamo without charges.
These people are terrorizing.
No, but okay,
Glenn.
yeah,
I've seen the video.
No, but so
I mean, they chop people's heads off.
Yeah, and my point was that the United States and lots of other countries engages in some really severe violence as well. When we invaded Iraq, we called our invasion shock and awe. The purpose of it, Shep, was to do so much violence that we would terrorize the civilian population into submission, into surrendering. And we indiscriminately bombed Baghdad. We certainly didn't try and kill civilians, but huge numbers of civilians
we
were
actually
killed
didn't
by the
indiscriminately
Iraq
do that.
War.
They picked targets very carefully from my memory of it.
No, I mean, the image that the United States government likes to depict of war is this very clinical, focused bombing, and yet civilians die every time the U.S. military or other militaries are used, because the military a machine designed to destroy. And the point that I'm really making is that if we want to have policy discussions, we shouldn't use fear-mongering terms and just have the government scream terrorism every single time it wants to justify something. Of course, ISIS are horrible people doing horrible things. No civilized, rational person would dispute that. But I think there's a lot more complexity to the question than simply to say they're terrorists. That means we now have to go and fight them.
I watched the Maher thing, and I saw a member of the American military really quite upset with you because I don't know, it felt rightfully so at the time that you were equating them to terrorists, these men and women who really do enlist, most of the ones I know, to go fight for our freedom.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody can question and even vehemently criticize decisions by our political leaders to send people to war, and nobody should hold the soldiers who are sent there responsible for that decision. And so the question of, is an invasion that's aggressive in nature and based on false pretenses of a sovereign country like Iraq terrorism, that has nothing to do with blaming the soldiers who are sent to that country by political leaders who they can't question but have to obey. I think everybody has learned in the United States to distinguish between political leaders and the soldiers when it comes to questioning and even condemning war decisions.
They touched on something very important there. And Greenwald, of course, is 100% right when he says criticizing Iraq or Afghanistan and the wars that we did is about criticizing the policymakers, not the soldiers, okay? And I argue that it's actually supporting the troops to say, let's get them the fuck out of there. They don't belong there. Excuse me. The wars were a terrible idea. You know what not supporting the troops is? To tell them, no, stay there, even though there's no way to define winning. We don't even know why we're still there. We were lied into the war in Iraq. That would be not supporting the troops. So he's exactly right to make that distinction, that whenever we talk about, hey man, it's fucked up what we're doing there, it's a critique of the policymakers, not a critique of the soldiers themselves. They're doing their job. But the really interesting conversation is over the word terrorism. Because I don't think, like some people do, that it's an inadequate word, okay, that, oh, we shouldn't use it. But I do think it's been horribly misused and abused. And what I mean by that is, if you go by the textbook definition of the word terrorism, a lot of people we don't call terrorists, but they are terrorists. Okay, so of course, Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra Front and ISIS, these are all terrorists. I have no problem calling them terrorists. But so are abortion clinic bombers. Okay, very rarely does the media refer to them as terrorists when that's exactly what they are. They are Christian terrorists. Whoever killed Dr. Tiller, that guy is a Christian terrorist. KKK members, they also do terrorism and they say it's in the name of Christianity and in the name of white supremacy. Neo-Nazi skinheads, they are terrorists. Sovereign citizens, the sovereign citizen movement that does violence against the government because they feel like they're not answerable to a state government or to the federal government. They are citizens because, they are terrorists. They're also sovereign citizens. Because the definition of terrorism is violence for a political ends. Also, all of the anti-government extremists that do violence in the name of small government, from killing, remember a while back they killed a census worker? Yes, that is terrorism. They refer to it in the media as, a terrible killing that happened here and here. No, that's terrorism. That fits the textbook definition of terrorism. How about the Sikh shooter? Remember the guy, what was it, probably about a year and a half ago now, maybe 2 years ago? The guy who killed at the Sikh temple, another neo-Nazi. It was referred across the media, they referred to it as a shooting. That is terrorism. Because in our minds, we've decided that if you're a white dude that does some sort of killing or some sort of violence in the name of politics, we're not going to call you a terrorist. But if you're Muslim, well, you're immediately a terrorist. Even if, by the way, it's not terrorism. If there's just a Muslim guy who does a killing and does violence, and there's no political ideology attached to it, they immediately say, he's got to be a terrorist. He's Muslim. So I don't know if Greenwald is advocating for this, the idea that we should just kind of stop using the word because it has no meaning anymore. But I do know some people advocate for that. But I don't advocate for that. I just advocate for using it properly, which means calling everybody who is a terrorist. And by the way, that includes, at times, yes, this is uncomfortable to say, but the U.S. government. In 1953, we went into Iran, we toppled their democratically elected government and the leader Mohammad Mossadegh, and we put in the Shah. We installed a dictator. That is terrorism. There's no two ways about it. You can't tiptoe around it or come up with flowery terms that make you feel better about what we did. Or you can do that, but you're wrong for doing that. It doesn't change the reality of it. It's like children who try to make themselves think, that if they punch somebody in the face and they're a bully, that, no, I'm not a bully because it's me. No, you are. Did you punch the kid in the face or not? All right, you're a fucking bully. Get over it. Sorry, I know a lot of people, how dare you say that? It's based on the facts. It's based on the facts and definitions. If you don't like it, shove it up your ass. It doesn't fucking matter if you don't like it. Okay? What are we, emotional children? We can't be objective here? And, another example, the U.S. and Chile. Topple a democratically elected government. Now, look, I don't go as far as some people in saying every intervention the U.S. has ever done is wrong. I am a non-interventionist. Probably the last time I would have gotten involved is maybe World War II or maybe Korea. But I don't like to use the troops unless there's an imminent threat of attack against the U.S., But that doesn't mean that, some weren't debatable and some weren't humanitarian. A lot of people say Bosnia and Kosovo, that was actually humanitarian, and there's a good argument to be made that that's what it was. But that doesn't mean that every, mission the U.S. government has done overseas is good. Some are good, some are bad, some were just flat out doing terrorism. It's a fact of reality. So let me give you one final example. The U.S. used napalm and Agent Orange chemical weapons on civilians in Vietnam. That's what the Pentagon Papers were about. Remember the whole Pentagon Papers thing? Daniel Ellsberg released the top secret documents, and then he was, traitor, he's working for the enemy, yada, yada. Now we realize he's a First Amendment hero. He's a constitutional hero for what he did, right? That's what that showed, that the U.S. government was basically, we were terrorists. The policymakers came up with these terrorist ideas, and we executed them. Okay? It's what it is, man. It hurts to acknowledge reality, but that's the reality. Another example, we used white phosphorus in Fallujah. A lot of the civilian population was destroyed. We used depleted uranium tips. Again, that's terrorism. Why is it that when somebody we don't like, if they use chemical weapons, they violated the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal and international law, and we need to bring them to justice. But when we do it, shh. Even when our allies do it. Israel used white phosphorus in the Palestinian territories. They were showing it on CNN, and Wolf Blitzer was giving a play-by-play on how they were doing it. You could see that they're using the white phosphorus now and dropping it from the helicopters. Could you imagine for a second if it was Iran using white phosphorus against somebody? We would start World War III over it immediately. But when we do it, what do you mean? It's just a mission that we're doing that's just and right. and it's a military exercise we're doing. But when people we don't like do it, terrorism. No, if you use violence against civilians, it is always terrorism, regardless of who's doing it. So yes, there are plenty of times when the U.S. has done humanitarian missions, but there's also plenty of times where we've been the terrorists. And also, let's be objective with the term terrorism. We can call ISIS and Al-Qaeda terrorists. Absolutely, they are. They fit the definition. It is what it is. But also the KKK are terrorists, sovereign citizens are terrorists, abortion clinic bombers are terrorists, neo-Nazis are terrorists, you name it.